And it looks like we are live right now. Yes, we are live. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this session. We're so excited to facilitate this. How we grade in a thinking classroom. Good evening, everybody. My name is Tim Brzezinski. I am a middle and high school mathematics teacher at the Engineering and Science University Magnet School in New Haven, Connecticut.
Hello, everyone. My name's Melissa McCain. I'm an instructional coach at Franklin, Indiana, and I'm definitely passionate about sharing how to build thinking classrooms.
Hi, I'm Abby Bates, and I am a math teacher. I teach high school in Stockton, California, and I am one of the admin of the Facebook group. So thanks to Tim and Melissa for being willing to share your session here with all of us tonight and beyond the Facebook group. So I'm excited to be here. So I'll just be here in the background.
Awesome. And by the way, congratulations for reaching 50,000 members in that group. Like, was it a month ago? That was pretty awesome. Yeah. And if you're joining us, whether you're joining us on YouTube, maybe from Facebook or Twitter, no matter what, let us know where you're from in the comments there. We'll throw them up there. And we've been looking forward to that as well. We are really excited to do this. Let us know where you're from, what you teach. That'd be cool. We'll just keep populating the bottom there. And feel free to ask questions. We can't promise we'll be able to answer every one because we only have an hour to do this. But really what we want to do is really get to the heart and the theme behind what Peter here talks about in chapter 14. Now, do not let this webinar be an excuse not to read chapter 14, all right? You still have homework. You got to read that book, especially chapter 14, because it's a gold mine. The whole book is a gold mine. It's awesome. So, but we're going to focus on how to grade in a thinking classroom tonight. And so let's see if we can actually add this to the stage here. There we go. How we grade in a thinking classroom, right? So what we're going to try to focus on tonight is several objectives, okay? The most important here is reflect on what in the world is the purpose and the meaning of grades, right? As teachers, we say students earn grades every quarter or whatever, but what does that actually mean, right? And we're also going to distinguish tonight very carefully between what we call events-based grading versus outcomes-based grading. In events-based, we have a point gathering system, and outcomes, we're talking more of like data. We're going to explore the Building Thinking Classrooms data gathering rubric that Peter proposes in chapter 14, and he writes about of Building Thinking Classrooms. And we're going to share how we can actually automate the grading process for BTC to make your lives as teachers a whole lot easier. So.
All right, so let's take a few minutes together and think about what does a student's grade represent. If you would, take a moment and think about what you would type in the comments about what does a student's grade represent. Now, I already know I'm going to get some questions, and the question is going to be, Are we talking about what should it represent or what does it represent? And you can go either way. But let's see what comes up in the comments of what does a student's grade represent.
This is very different, Melissa, from when we did this at NCTM 2 weeks ago. We had a whole audience of teachers who could not stop talking about this, but it's very different virtually. But what does a student's grade represent, or what should it represent? Don't be bashful. Feel free to type in the comments there if you want. If a few come up, we'll pop them up there. But this is a hard question to answer. Right? I mean, in our hearts and our heads, we kind of know what it should represent, but it's like, ooh, learning and growth. Thank you, Sharon. All right. Yeah. Okay. Or how much should represent what they know. Very good point, Facebook user. Absolutely. It should be standards only, definitely not practice. Interesting take from Jeffrey there, a level of mastery, right? A lot of common themes from the comments we're seeing here, right? Their understanding of the beautiful mastery, growth. They're just coming through. You guys are an awesome, engaging audience. Thank you so much for letting us know what you think. All right.
So Tim, let's take a minute and look at a couple of different ways that grades are collected.
Yeah, this is what Peter refers to as the point gathering paradigm, right? And this is what many teachers in the United States and around the world, this is how we grade, right? We have events, quiz 1, test 1, project 1, homework 1, right? We're so creative in how we number them as math teachers, right? And don't students strive to collect as many points as possible? I mean, if you look at that, it's that big numerator over that bigger denominator. And we want that numerator to be as big as possible. So they collect all the points they can possibly get. And supposedly, over the years, teachers, we believe that this creates an objective grade based on what the student has truly learned. But does it?
That's a great question, Tim. Let's take a deeper dive into an end of the year dilemma that usually comes up. Let's start with Ben. Ben has earned 69% of his points. Now, let me share a little bit more about Ben with you before you make your decision of what grade Ben should receive. He has 3 absences. He completed most of his assignments. He's very well behaved, and he participates. Don't put it in the chat right yet, but I would want you to stop and think just a second. What grade would you give Ben knowing this information about him? All right. Now let's look at Abigail. Abigail also earned 69% of her points. She has 15 absences. 40% of her assignments are missing or incomplete. She is well behaved, but she's very disengaged. So we have two completely different students with the same percentage of points. What grade do you assign each student? Think about it and then tell us, what grade would you give Ben? What grade would you give Abigail? Go ahead and put it in the chat.
It's always that struggle when that grade ends in a 9. That's like teachers like, I want to go home. Nope. Got to figure this out. Interestingly enough, not enough info. We don't know. Facebook users onto something there. I think there's a lot of people named Facebook user on this thing here, but let's see. For real C&D. Yeah. You know, it's interesting because when Melissa and I facilitated this, we gave this session, and we were so psyched that Peter actually joined this session 2 weeks ago at NCTM. But we had a lot of people. Okay, interesting. We had a lot of people, actually half and half. And my colleague William McKinney and I, we facilitated this in Maine at the New England Math Teacher Conference, and half the room was like, one is at 69, the other's at 70, and the other's 69, the other's 70. So we had teachers here and here, and some teachers were both up and some teachers were both down, and some teachers were doing this, right? And so that's a great question, Jennifer. Does the grade reflect what they know, right? Supposedly, again, it's supposed to be objective, but does it? But let's talk about objectivity, shall we? Objectivity, as Peter defines it, or if you Google it, right? It's expressing or dealing with facts or conditions as perceived, without distortion by personal feelings, prejudices, or interpretations. We have to leave our personal bias aside. Yes, Ben is a very hard worker. Can you go back one slide really quick, Melissa, please? Ben is a very hard worker, right? But look at this there. I saw some teachers in our main session, they raised their hand. They said, you know what, Tim? Well, Abigail was out 15 times. She hardly didn't. She did 60% of her work, but yet she has the aptitude to earn almost a 70. She clearly has a higher mathematical ability than Ben. Ben had to bust his butt for that. How come Abigail shouldn't be at the 70? And then other teachers were arguing like, no, well, the work ethic is part of it. And so every teacher has their own personal feelings about that. They're bringing into that. And that creates a problem, because what is truly objective about it? Nothing. When we grade events, quiz 1, test 1, project 1, where objectivity goes right out the window because we're only looking at a limited picture, right? There's distortion there. Let's keep going.
All right, so let's take a little bit closer look at objectivity. Let's all go skydiving, and together we will go, but individually you get to pick who packs your parachute. So check out Abigail, Ben, and Charlie. Who would you choose to pack your parachute?
Let's say you're going skydiving, 3 weeks from now, and this is the data we have, right?
A little bit of time to consider.
Yeah. And this comes right out of Peter's book on page 257 there. I love this illustration so much.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of data embedded in this.
Sorry, Abigail. I forgot she was doing those. I was putting them there. It's like, yeah, we have a lot of Abigails there. Of course, Abigail's in the background showing these comments. She's thinking, you spelled the name wrong. There's not supposed to be an E in there, right? But Peter's from Canada. Might be how they spell in Canada or Vancouver. I don't know. But yeah, So interesting. We all want Abigail. Why? Because, oh, go ahead, Melissa. At the very end, what happened? That's true. We do need units for time. Let's suppose weeks. It's all relative, right? But let's think about this here, right? We look at Abigail, Ben. I think nobody wants Ben to do it in 3 weeks because Ben started great, but then, man, his packing score just kind of went right down. Maybe if we think about this for a second, let's actually take the y-axis label, parachute packing score, for a second, and let's replace that label on the vertical axis with demonstrates. I love that, Todd. Charlie, if I'm feeling lucky, good luck. Well, see, Charlie might be Charlie might be the type of kid that goes home to mom one day, dad the next day, mom one day, and they're split and the parents are split apart. But when he goes over one parent's house, it's all hell. But when he goes to another parent's house, it's more peaceful. There might be that kind of thing going on, But with Ben started off great, but maybe his parents just got divorced and something's going on at home that we don't know about. All right, our kids are going through so much stuff, right? There's a lot that we teachers don't see. Guidance and administration sees a lot more than we do, right? But when we look at it from an objective standpoint, it's really hard to tell. I mean, think about this for a second. If we replace the parachute packing score label with demonstrates mastery of course objectives, then Abigail and Ben and Charlie have all earned the same grade for the quarter. Let that sink in. Given this data right here, we can say, or Peter would say, that Abigail, Ben, and Charlie have all earned the same parachute packing grade. But clearly, everybody wants Abigail to pack their parachute. Why? Because Abigail is the one who truly knows the most. And this is what Peter refers to as the myth of objectivity and the tyranny of objectivity, which kind of guides us and no, we're supposedly objective. But the objectivity here is a big myth. Why? Because that one number, just because Abigail and Ben and Charlie all got an 80 in geometry for the quarter, it doesn't tell us much. It's not truly objective. And that's the problem with events-based grading. Can we keep going? Yeah. See, that's the problem Peter talks about. Peter talks a lot in chapter 14 about the problem with point gathering. Why? Because the focus is on the final score. And that score doesn't really tell us specific data about what the student's strengths are. Those strengths should be celebrated, right? The student's weaknesses. And the points don't show the journey of growth and consistency. And the current system that we currently have here in the United States, and I'm sure a lot of places around the world, we include failure over a focus on what the student has truly mastered. Yes, we're humans. We all forget something. But if we go back to Abigail, if you go back to the Abigail graph for 1 second, let's suppose we're a middle school math teacher and Abigail struggles with, can we just right to that bottom part, the horizontal part at the beginning, right? Abigail struggles with right there. She struggles with adding fractions with like denominators. She's just doing it wrong. But then she has an aha moment 2 days later. She grows from that. And then by the end, she's adding fractions with unlike denominators flawlessly. So why should she be punished for the poor performance she did at the very beginning? Because she learned from that and she grew. So why does not her final grade reflect what she truly has learned? That's the problem with events-based grading. Abigail has an 80, but her grade should be much higher. All right, let's keep going. So
what alternatives are there? Well, what we're going to talk more about today is the data gathering paradigm. And so it's outcome-based instead of events-based. It's focused on data collection, not collecting points. It recognizes and rewards consistency, sustained progress, and growth, not failure. So what does that look like?
All right. That's my slide, right? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So in chapter 14, Peter introduces this newer type of rubric. We call it the thinking classroom approach rubric here. You see right there on the left side, we have objectives. They're actually not events. All right. So we just go ahead and keep. Oh, wait, I was going to share my screen there. I apologize. Let me go here. Add to the stage. Never mind. Let me see here. I'll add this to the stage. Sorry about that. And it was right over. I should have been prepared. Here we go. Let me go to present. All right. Can you see my screen okay? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. So right here, right, the thinking classroom approach, right? These objectives here. Notice immediately, this is not an assignment name. right? Right over here, I'm not going to put test 1, quiz 1, homework 1. These are not events anymore. These are objectives that students need to master. Okay, so here's an example from Algebra 1, right? Here's typical. Now, I write it more specifically in that, but for the sake of illustration, to keep it in 3, here we go. Now, right here, Peter describes 3 attainment levels at which the student can demonstrate mastery of an objective. All right, or they could demonstrate knowledge individually, as he words it, right? So they could do it at the basic level, which he denotes with as a score of 2 in his book, and intermediate level with a score of 3, and advanced is scored 4. So if you look at this in a nutshell, right, here are some examples of different types of exercises students can solve in Algebra 1, say, to try to demonstrate, to try to show the teacher, hey, they can demonstrate knowledge individually with solving any one of these equations. Okay, so if that makes sense. Now, why are intermediate and advanced grayed out over here? Because I think most teachers would tell you, look, if it's a one-step equation, that's so freaking easy, right? The only kind of question I can give my students here is, the only kind of question I can give my student for this objective is a basic question. These really don't exist for that objective. Okay, but when it comes to multi-step equations, sure, we could ask them basic questions, intermediate questions, and also some maybe advanced questions. See how the variable's only on one side here, the variable's on both sides here, and the variables on both sides, and we got some distributing to do. You see what I mean? There's a lot more involved in the advanced problem. All right, so now, Peter describes students demonstrating mastery needing to be based on what he calls consistent attainment. Okay, we're going to get more into details of what that means in just a little bit. But what is the weight of each objective? I think I might have answered that already, right? Now, since for the basic level, right, a basic problem is only worth 2 points, so the student can only earn at most a 2 for that particular objective. Again, we're not going to say how we're going to get into this part after. Melissa's going to take us on the journey for this column, but we're just going to focus on what those like mini denominators are. Okay, so for a 2-step equation, the highest possible score a student could actually earn for that objective would be a 3. And the reason being is because there's no advanced problem exists right now for this objective. So therefore, it's not as easy as a basic, but it's, if that makes sense. All right. Now for a multi-step equation, if students can actually master like the hardest problems, well, then they would get the 4 out of 4 eventually. But again, that makes sense. And so now the big grand denominator here is 9 because the sum of those numbers is obviously 9. So this is what it's starting to look like. But the big takeaway I want you guys to get from this, is that we're no longer grading events. I'll say it again. We are no longer grading events. We are grading outcomes. Students demonstrating mastery of this knowledge demonstrated individually for this objective, that is an outcome. This is an outcome. This is an outcome. We're grading outcomes now. All right, Melissa, it's on you now, right?
All right, so we're going to move on from Tim's discussion of what we're grading, which is outcomes, to how we grade them. So how can we more objectively track student data? Peter gives us in the book a set of symbols, and the symbols yield valuable data. They are come from the seeing the objectives within classrooms. And so they're marked several different ways. Let's look at the top set here. Notice you see 3 checks. All of them represent knowledge demonstrated individually by the student. So the first one might be your more traditional outcomes of maybe a test or a quiz or an exit ticket that a student demonstrated knowledge individually on. But notice the check with the O. It doesn't have to be that test. Remember, we're getting away from limiting it to events only, and we're opening it up. So this check means they demonstrated knowledge individually in an observation. So you observed them doing it. The next one is knowledge demonstrated in a conversation. So maybe you heard them have a conversation with another student where they were demonstrating the knowledge, or maybe they had a conversation with you. Any of those will count because we're not held just to the event. So all of those would count towards mastery. Let's look down at the bottom real quick. A couple other symbols are the X. The X means they attempted it, but they did not get it correct. So any incorrect markings could just be marked with an X, and those do not count towards mastery. Notice they also don't include the failure in mastery. They're just not counted towards mastery. And then the other one is an M, and we know there's a big difference between someone like Ben, who might have started it but got it incorrect, and Abigail, who was just disinterested and didn't start it. So we want to keep those markings because the symbols yield valuable data.
Exactly.
Now these three in the middle, we're going to talk more about those as we go along a little bit, but notice we haven't told you whether they count towards mastery if the student makes a silly mistake or they receive help during the observation, or even if it's at group work, because that's kind of, you are the professional, and what you see going on, you need to decide if they're showing mastery. And we're going to show you a little bit more about how you have that control over the situation. So let's look at Abigail again. And here are some objectives that we're going to be grading. Notice this isn't a test, it isn't a quiz, it's an objective. We're going to be looking at the objectives. So we have 3 objectives here for Abigail. The first one is to evaluate an expression using substitution. I want you to look at the markings that we just talked about. I'll give you one quick glance back.
Well, should we describe what do you want to describe what actually constitutes for the white wording on the left?
Oh, yes, definitely. I was getting there. So,
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. So we're looking at the markings, and we know that from the chart, the first one, any check means they demonstrated knowledge individually. So when you look at this, the other thing you need to keep in mind is what Tim was pointing out, that mastery of any objective means that they have 2 consecutive check marks. And Peter does a really good job of explaining how he came to that number of 2 consecutive check marks for consistency in order to show mastery. So
years
that's
of research.
Years of research coming out here. So if you look at Abigail's, what grade do you think she would get for this first objective? That's right. She'd get a 2 because we see 2 check marks here together. Now we could have quit looking at that point, but this teacher went ahead and wanted to get a little bit of extra data, and that's fine. But when the student receives 2 consecutive check marks, they've earned that level of mastery. So let's look at the second objective, simplify an algebraic expression. What do you think when you look at these? What would you give Abigail? All right, Abigail earned a 2. The reason she earned a 2 is because 2 is what the basic level was represented by. And notice she has 2 check marks in a row. So she's got that consistency that we talked about under the basic. If you look at the intermediate level, she's definitely getting there, but at this point, she might not have shown mastery. Now, I know you're going to point out this little silly mistake here, and we're going to talk more about that in a second. But let's go on to the third learning objective. So solve an equation algebraically. And notice we can go all the way up to the advanced level, and you see the observations by the teacher or the data collected by the teacher in each level. So what score do you think Abigail might get? Abigail earns a 4. Some people might question this because she didn't earn a 2 because she doesn't have the 2 consecutive check marks. She didn't earn a 3 because she doesn't have the 2 consecutive check marks, but she does have 2 consecutive check marks in the advanced level. And the theory behind this is if a student can do the application at an advanced level, the basic and intermediate should be built into that. And so if they can do it twice in a row at an advanced level, you don't have to worry about going back to check that basic and intermediate. The way you build your objectives here at each level should work that in. And so now, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and now Abigail has an 8 out of 9, which is then easily transferred into our traditional grade books.
Right. And this is what Peter refers to as, I think, backwards compatibility. The grades are backwards compatible. The level at which the student earns 2 consecutive checks in a row, that's the score they should earn for that particular objective or outcome. right? Remember the example from Abigail? Remember her graph looked like this, and she like this, and she went up, and now her parachute packing scores up here. She struggled with adding fractions, like in that basic one. Let's suppose that last objective was adds fractions, and the basic ones were fractions with like denominators. For some reason, she added numerators and denominators for 2 days in a row. Why? I don't know, but she just had a couple off days. But then something clicked on Wednesday, and on Friday's quiz, man, she is freaking ace in that thing with unlike denominators. And they're like, see what she's circling right there in the advanced category. Why should Abigail be punished for a poor score on the quiz on Monday, that event, remember, when clearly she showed growth over the week, right? And on Friday, she's adding fractions with unlike denominators flawlessly. She should earn the highest possible grade she could earn for that outcome. Notice we're not placing emphasis on events anymore. We're placing emphasis on outcomes.
And in addition, taking the focus off of the failure and onto the mastery. Okay, so let's look at Ben real quick. Ben's going to be a little bit harder to interpret, but go ahead and look at Ben's first objective, evaluate an expression using substitution. What do you think Ben's going to get?
Again, 2 consecutive checks we need. Do we have that?
Yeah, we don't have those consecutive checks. But notice he didn't get a 0. And the reason Ben did not get a 0 is because Ben is working on this. He is making progress. He is sticking it through. So if a student has started working on an objective, they're going to at least get a 1. They can't show the mastery in any level until they've got those 2 consecutive checks. But as soon as they start working and showing some progress on it, they're going to get the 1. All right, so let's look at the next objective for Ben. What do you think Ben's going to get on this one? Hopefully that one was pretty easy. Ben got the 3 because he has 2 consecutive check marks right under the intermediate, which was worth 3 points. And so that ends up with a 3. Okay, I'm going to give you just a second. I think I almost showed it to you, or may have shown it to you, but I'll take that back off. See if you can decide on this last objective, what would Ben get? This is a tricky one. Okay, some of you might have seen that Ben got the score of 2, but I want to bold this for you because there's a lot of discussion that goes behind this, and Tim's going to take you through that discussion here in a second. But notice the student was able to show evidence of the objective, then they made a silly mistake, and then they showed evidence of the objective. That is not 2 checks in a row. And so many people might say that's a 2. Other people might look at that and go, well, the silly mistake was just a silly mistake. It didn't stop them from showing the objective. And so that's really like 3 check marks in a row. And on the tool that we're getting ready to show you, you'll have the option and the control to override that. So if you're leaning towards the 2 or you're leaning towards the 4, you could click in the cell and just completely override it. But this is where we had some really interesting conversation with Peter. And so I'm going to let Tim walk you through that discussion.
Sure. And that's the thing. Like, you know what? We go on an airplane. The plane is practically flying in autopilot, isn't it? But are there certain times when the pilots decide to take the plane out of autopilot for whatever reason? Sometimes they just do. And this is what I like to call the silly mistake, what Peter refers to as the S. S stands for silly mistake. To answer those other questions, N stood for not attempted, H stood for got help from a teacher. But we have it all. We have it all in a resource for you later. You'll be able to see everything. But silly mistakes is kind of like autopilot, and I might have to take it out for a minute just to analyze it case by case. So students make silly mistakes all the time. We're teachers. We know that. All right. Let's keep going there. So some silly mistakes, right? We could actually, and this came from Peter himself after he attended our NCTM talk. And he said he gave us awesome, valuable insight, but he felt it was so imperative to denote silly mistakes in the 2 categories. And the categories are, does the mistake detract from the objective or the standard that you're assessing, or does it not? Right? So some silly mistakes detract from the objective, right? Means that, wow, the kid made a silly mistake, but it totally shows that they don't understand the objective. I'm going to show you a clear example of one in just a second. Some silly mistakes don't detract from the objective. All right. So let's take a look at one. Exactly, Chelsea. Same here. All right. All of us are living proof of that every day. Right. So Peter, but what we've done here is we've denoted a check sub S, meaning that, you know what, the silly mistake does not detract from the objective, but an X, which means they got it incorrect. An X sub S means S for silly, but the X means, dude, there's a big fundamental lack of conceptual understanding here that we got to address. So it totally detracts from the objective. So we have to be more specific in gathering data. Here's an example of not detracting from the objective. Look at this distance question. I want to find the exact distance between 2 points in the coordinate plane. The students set it up perfectly. Look at this. Yeah, I mean, I teach it. The distance formula is the Pythagorean theorem anyway, is it not? To look at it conceptually. But we have the run squared plus the rise squared being the distance squared. The run and rise are correct, right? 9 plus 64. Oops, student messed up. They said 9 plus 64 is 72, not 73. It's supposed to be 73, right? So the distance is not 6 root 2. It should be root 73. This is an example of a silly mistake that does not detract from the objective. The student clearly showed that the objective was, they demonstrated they demonstrated knowledge individually that they could calculate the distance between 2 points in the coordinate plane. Did they not? All you teachers say yes, they did. But the objective here was not adding numbers like they do in first grade. If it was a first or second grade objective, then yeah, that would be an X sub S. But this is algebra here, geometry, right? So here's a case where this silly mistake does not detract from the objective at all. So that would earn a check sub S. Okay, but here's an example of a silly mistake that detracts from the objective. And that face is my face and every geometry teacher's face when they see this. You know what I'm talking about? Exactly. A student writes a crap equation like this. They may have a procedural knowledge of the Pythagorean theorem, right? But they clearly lack a fundamental conceptual understanding of what it's really saying. That the sum of the squares of both legs added together, right, equals the area of the square of the hypotenuse, right? So geometry teachers, we've all seen this before, and we want to bang our heads in the desk when we do. But whenever I see this in my geometry class, I denote it with an X sub S in my gradebook. Right. So there's two clear examples of one of each of those.
All right. So let's take a look back at Ben and see how now through Peter's conversation, we're able to better denote that the student was able to show mastery and just made a silly mistake. And so now our 4 is a little more concrete and it would be calculated this way without us overriding it. So the addition of these few markings or symbols since the publication of the book were very helpful. And in conversations in past presentations, there's been a lot of questions about, well, what if I wanted to mark this or what if I wanted to mark that? And so you're going to see once we take you into the tool that not only are all these symbols that Peter has walked us through, including the check of S and the X of S available, but we've also left a little bit of space for you to add your own custom symbols. So we hope that that's helpful to you.
Absolutely. Was this your slide or mine? I forgot. It's late.
I think it's mine. Okay, whose idea was to have this at 9 o'clock at night? Right. We all live
well, there's people in Australia watching, so I'm a little jealous, but go ahead.
It's not 9 o'clock everywhere, is it? All right. So opportunities to show mastery in a data gathering paradigm. So we've already talked about the what, the outcomes based, and the how, which is the symbols and the markings. But now is the when. So when can we gather this data? And notice some of the traditional settings are on here. So if you give a quiz question and a student shows mastery of an objective in that quiz, well, then mark it. If you give a test and they show that, mark it. But notice those don't have to be the entire quiz and they don't have to be the entire test. I know repeatedly, if you ask teachers what they need more of, every one of them will tell you time, and that they spend so much time testing. Stop. Test what needs to be tested. Get the evidence that you need, and don't hang around in that traditional zone any more than you need to, because there are other ways in the outcome-based grading paradigm that we can look at. So one of those is a one-on-one conversation. And I want you to note this asterisk because we're going to come back to that with a really good example in just a moment. But one-on-one conversations with a teacher, if you can have a conversation with a student and they can talk you through understanding and showing mastery, don't penalize them for maybe a lack in their ELA skills as far as showing mastery in math. Let that shine through. Other ways for getting outcome is teacher observations during individual work time, or teacher observations during group work time. Once again, if they're working in a group and you see that the whole group got the answer, well, you might just mark it with a G. But if you walk up in a group and there's one student explaining to the rest of the students how to show mastery, well, then check them off and give them that mastery demonstrated individually. Notice there's an extra bullet point here, because when you take away the limits, the traditional limits of they have to show it on a quiz or they have to show it on a test, and you open that world up for them, they'll come up with a lot more ways that they'll start showing you mastery. And it kind of puts it back in the student's control, that they have that option of, how can you show me that you've mastered this objective? Puts a completely different feel on it for not only the teacher, but the students.
Exactly. So I'm not sure how well this is going to come across here, but I just want to give you an example of what a check sub C looks like. Now, I'll be honest, I've actually used this. I started using this starting a few weeks ago. I totally am grading this way. I no longer grade events in my middle and high school classes in New Haven, Connecticut. I grade outcomes. And honestly, it has helped me be more sane as a teacher. It's helped me become more focused, and it helps me flexibly and effectively differentiate every student's level of active engagement within the curriculum. Now, I know for a fact that not every student in the class is going to be able to do a 4-level problem. Now, I will maximize those opportunities for growth over time, right? Totally will. And I'll always have the attitude of what I heard at CAMT, the CAMT conference down in Texas when I was there. I went to Ian Vandersnee. He's a math teacher, I think, in Illinois. And I love what he said in his session. He said, you know what? He said, as traditional teachers will tell students, well, you clearly never demonstrated knowledge of the Pythagorean theorem. His attitude is, with this kind of grading system, no. It's like, listen, I believe you could do the Pythagorean theorem. You just haven't demonstrated to me that you can do it yet. So let's do it. You know, it's a whole different heart and mind and philosophical change, which we'll get into soon. But here's an example right here of a check sub C through a conversation. Now, Melissa's going to take it and I think maybe full screen it if she can. I don't know how the sound quality is going to come out, but Abigail, if you could actually drop that link in the chat right now, just in case it doesn't come out good here, people can watch it in another tab. That would be wonderful. Please. Okay. Can we get sound on there, Melissa, or no? We have the wording there, but basically this was, yeah, I don't think we have sound in there. That's okay. But Abigail put the link to this video Melissa's showing right here in the comments for whatever platform you're watching this on, so you could see it afresh. But it was a conversation that I had with a student. It was an open middle problem involving corresponding angles, and the student had to use like digits 1 to 20, no more than one time each, to actually build a scenario that was legit. And so this was an example of what I called for that class an intermediate level question. You know, because obviously parallel lines or related angles, fine. You give them one angle, you find the others. That's a basic level. There's only 2 different angles to find, right? But open middle questions, I find in awesome, openmiddle.com. If you haven't checked it out, make sure you do. It's an awesome place to get intermediate and also advanced level questions for many concepts and many curricula. You're very welcome, Kimberly. So that happens there. You can watch that video on your own. And what's next, Melissa? Thinking right there. Again, we wanted to make your life easy. Now, when I read chapter 14 of Peter's book right here, it's like, oh my gosh, I really want to do this, but I am messy with paper. I cannot have 80,000 pieces of paper for 80,000 students and checks and H's and G's. It drive me nuts. I mean, Google Sheets can automate something, can't it? I mean, I should be able to put 2 checks in a row and have Google Sheets say 2, 3, or 4. It's doable. So during IXL, we're required to do IXL testing in New Haven, Connecticut for a diagnostic benchmark. So I had some extra planning time on my hands. So I started playing Google Sheets. And the story behind this is, you know, my colleagues, William McKinney and Brandon All, who I love collaborating with, they jumped on and they helped create version 1.0 of this working, building, thinking classrooms grading rubric. Whenever it sees 2 checks in a row from the highest level, it'll actually dump that number in a cell. Like, oh, that's cool, you know? But then when I met Melissa at the ATM&E conference in Maine a month ago, or a little over a month ago, it was actually less than a month ago. It's been a short time. But she said, hey, can you email me that Google? I have some ideas, and man, her Google Sheet wizardry skills are like freaking off the charts. She blew me away. She stayed up all night one night, and she just like made it like I woke up and I'm like, this is like what I've been dreaming of. So what we're about to show you is like Will and Melissa, I'm sorry, Will and Brandon and I created, but Melissa joined the team, and man, she just made it a million times better. So thank you, Melissa. We're going to show you how this works. This is the Building Thinking Classrooms automated grading rubric. And we promise we're going to give you the link to this at the very end of the session. So trust me, it's coming. Okay. Because if we gave it to you now, you wouldn't pay attention to us. You would just go and play with it yourself and then come back with more questions. So we're going to answer them all right now as best we can. All right. So when you go, it's a Google Sheet that you don't have edit access to, but what do you do when you don't have edit access? You go to File and what? Make a copy. Right? So the first thing you do is just go make your own copy. All right. Oh, just make sure you change the folder, Melissa, because I think you actually are the editor there. But everybody else wouldn't be. Right? Yeah, let's just put it in your drive. It bothers William, my department head, how many untitled documents I have in my Google Docs, but we'll get to that. So that's another story. There we go. So first things first, we make a copy of this grading rubric right here. So I know we have 20 minutes left in the broadcast here, but just to let you know, this is like a what, why, and how kind of broadcast. All right. You just got the what, you just got the why for the first, you just got the why and the what for the first 40 minutes. And now in the last 20 minutes here, we're going to give you the how. How can I really make this like a million times easier, say, for myself? Okay. So right here, but yeah, let's see. When were we going to do that slide, Melissa? I forgot the whole thing about the philosophical change. You remember? Was that before this or after? I totally forgot.
At the very end. Right after we go through this.
All right. So this is it right here. Everything. That was good. Everything you need is right here. The symbols are there. Now, if we focus up, can we control the plus a couple times so we can see or just maybe zoom in, make it 125% or 150? I want people to be able to see that top right corner really clearly. All right. Or no, just the 100 and yeah. I was just thinking right in Google Sheets. Perfect. Now, basic in Peter's book, he denotes basic as a 2, right? And when students demonstrate knowledge individually at a basic level, Peter told us that was intended to be what is considered to be the minimum passing grade for a course. If it's only basic only, it's just the minimum passing grade. So a 2 in Canada, he told us it's 50%. So 2 out of 4 is 50%, right? Now I teach in New Haven, Connecticut, where students need to have, I think the passing is like a 60%. So I changed so if you change 50 to a 60, Melissa, really quickly, you'll notice that it changes. 60 will change it to 3, 4, 5. So the rubric that I use in New Haven, Connecticut, it's out of 3, 4, 5 instead of Peter's 2, 3, 4. For some of you, it might be a 70%. Maybe it's a more rigorous kind of thing. So if you make it a 70, it'll change it to 4, 5, 6, which I get. It's 4 out of 6 is not technically 70%. It's really 66 and 2, 3. I get that. But again, and then I think the other option is 75%, which is really tough, which I think is a 6, 7, 8, right? So there you go. But let's put it back to 50%. We'll keep what Peter had. Okay. For now. But that's a couple things you want to make sure you do there. So let's now go to the class list. Absolutely. A Facebook user, yes. In fact, the same URL that I think we gave like a month ago or 2 months ago, whenever it was, we just updated the Google Sheet in there. It's a brand new one. So absolutely. So what you want to do is populate your student names. Just copy and paste them from Excel. By the way, what Melissa is doing right here, and I'm explaining, you only have to do this once a year at the very beginning. That's it. Again, our goal is to make your lives easy. So we have a class full of several students: Brandon, William, Melissa, me, and Peter, and we have a few extra names, which we'll get into the why after. Okay. So now let's go to unit details. Okay. Here's our first unit. We're just going to copy and paste to keep it quick. And I just realized those objectives do not even go with that unit, but that's okay. It's just for the sake of illustration, right? Can you actually zoom in at maybe 150%, please, just so it's easier, because it's kind of small on the screen here. Thank you so much. Okay, perfect. Now, for unit 1, could we title it, just say, I don't know, we could just say, let's call it solving equations or something like that. So I'm an Algebra 1 teacher, and maybe I'm starting the year like this. Okay, whatever. Equations with a Z. See how tired we are? Look at that. Now, okay, now for solving a one-step equation algebraically, could you go to where it says highest level assessed? Now we got to choose. What's the highest level we're going to assess the students at? Definitely won't be advanced because it's a one-step equation. Didn't we have it at basic? So we keep it at basic. And it weights it at 1, total points 2. So two-step equations. I think that was the highest level we showed in the Google slides was an intermediate. And multi-steps, we can definitely go advanced there, right? We can definitely give some advanced level questions there. All right. So now, there we go. Now, also to let you know, when Will and I met with Peter after our first time we did this talk, I think in Maine, Peter said what would be really cool is if we could weight the objectives, right? Because not all objectives are weighted equally in any unit within any curriculum. I think teachers would agree. So maybe just for illustration, we're going to keep it at 1s by default, but Melissa, can you change that last one to a 2 just for ha-has? And see how when we change it to a 2, see how that 4 changed to an 8. If we change it to a 3, it'll make it a 12. You know what I mean? Anything that's gray auto-calculates. Don't touch the grays. Only touch what's in blue. Okay? To make your life easier. All right? All right. So that is that. So now, if you go to the master template, look at this. See? Let's zoom out just a little bit. And this is kind of how we left it right here. See what I mean? And right off to the right side, hey, we still have what the symbols mean, so we could just see it for a nice, easy reference. Okay? Now, how nice would it be if we could make a copy of this for every single student in our class? Well, it turns out you can. Now, in fact, granted, this is just for illustration's sake. My geometry unit, it's like I have like 12 or 13 objectives listed out. And someone in the comments asked me if they could, my email is tim@brzmath.com. If you email me, I'll send you a screenshot of something if you want an example of something. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Facebook user. Appreciate it. Right there. So you can choose to hide those, but again, the more objectives you have in a unit, it's all going to populate up anyway. So the grays aren't even going to matter. So now go to where it says create student copies. Yes, I have, Chelsea. I've been using this for weeks now, and it's game changing. It's awesome. Email me. Someone will put my email in the thing there. All right. So now when you hit create student copies at the top, you need to allow authorization. So hit OK, because it's not an official approved Google add-on. All right. But once you give it permission, because I created a Google app script to let this happen. So I promise you there's no viruses here. I would not know how to make a virus if I even tried. I promise you that. So you just have to hit allow only once. And watch this. Now, if Melissa hits create student copies one more time, watch the bottom of the screen. Watch the bottom of her screen. Look at this. It's going to create one it's running the script. See? It made one for Brandon. It made one for William. So you could have a whole class full of 20 or 30 something students. It'll make little tabs all at the bottom, and all of those tabs will be clones of the master template. You said don't touch what is in gray. Does the objective number also populate when you... Yes, it does. Can you go back to answer Chelsea? That's a great question, Chelsea. We're going to give the URL out at the end, so stay tuned. Promise you there. So if you go back to unit details for a second, I want to answer Chelsea's question right away because I'm going to forget. Can we go back to unit D? Oh, because the script's still running?
Yeah, give it just a second. Let me see if I can.
Do you have a lot of stuff open right now on your computer?
Most users are going to understand that they all populate.
It's going there.
I'm going to go ahead and dismiss it. Oh, wait a minute. I think we just about got it.
Yep.
There we go.
I promise you it doesn't take this slow. It depends on bandwidth and stuff like that. But for a class of 30 students, it may take like 3 minutes to create or 4 minutes. But it's slow, but you do it once a year and you're done. All right. So now if you go back to your details. Yeah. You want me to? I can screen share if you want.
Yeah, you might take over mine's because it was running the script in the background.
Okay. Let me just see here for a second. Can you actually email me that? Can you send me the link? Could you make me an editor of that really quickly? And I'll just go to Google Sheets and get it and share. 1 second, because we have technical difficulties. Sorry about that. Thank you.
All right. I'm gonna refresh real quick.
Go for it. I promise you this normally does not happen, but
no, it's because I'm running the meet at the same time.
Yep. But to answer, yeah, let me just go get this thing here, building. Here we go. I think I could find an extra copy here. Just 1 second. Copy. Right. Oh, you got it?
I think I've got it pulled up now.
Okay.
It's low. Yeah.
So sorry about the wait, everybody. Not intentional.
All right. And I'm going to head on. No, never. All right. So here we are back at unit details. If I go down to the next objective that I'm going to add in. Oops. As soon as I hit enter, it automatically labels it with the objective number.
Mm-hmm.
I say automatically.
And to answer Chelsea's question, Chelsea's asking, once it's cloned, when you add more objectives to the master, does it auto show up in the clones? The answer to that is yes. Think of the master template as the parent, although clone ones are the children. If for those of you that do computer science, right? Every child sheet is a copy of the parent master sheet, right? So for example, in geometry, oh crap, I forgot to put an objective in I did something I totally forgot to put in there. I just typed it in and every student sheet gets populated with that objective and the highest weight it's worth. So yes.
Yeah, so real quick, if you look, when I typed in objective, it automatically put the 1-4 there. If I go to the master template, it's all automatically got the 1-4. Now the red is showing up because I didn't assign it a level or a weight, so it doesn't have a score. So the red's telling me that something's wrong. But if you look, then also it updated it on each student one. So yes, as you add objectives, they'll automatically show up for each student.
Exactly. Okay. So exactly. So now if we give Brandon grades or something like that, could we zoom in a little bit? Mm-hmm. Maybe like if we go to 150% or something, or 125 maybe.
Yeah. How's that?
There we go. That's better. Yeah. So let's just show how this works here. So for the first one, could you just put like a check, and maybe an X, and then an H. Oh, they got help, right? And then let's do a check through a conversation, or what? It doesn't matter, right? 2 check types. Watch that one. Now it's going to become a 2. Why? Because there's 2 consecutive checks there now. Right? Sure, you can do it on paper, but I find it easier to do it on a Google Sheet. It does the automating a grade for me, right? And so right there. But now let's go to the intermediate level. Brandon solved some basic problems now. Let's give him all X's. He's just struggling with 2 steps on Monday or Tuesday. He's just struggling to get that concept. Okay, but now the next day we do intermediate level questions. He's just acing it. So let's put 2 checks right there in the intermediate column for that objective there. You see the fact that he struggled in basic. Now watch that one. That one's going to change to a 3 as soon as she puts another check type there. Remember the backwards compatibility that Peter describes. the score they earn for that particular outcome. Remember, no longer an event. That one check, he could have done a problem on 2 different sheets of paper from this was a problem I redid, this is the problem here. Doesn't matter where the source is. The fact that he did it consecutively is what matters. All right.
And in addition, Tim, if a student were to come out of the gate showing you an advanced level, you can go ahead and mark them. And even though you don't mark anything in intermediate or basic, once again, there's that backwards compatibility.
Exactly. So it's built in, so that it makes your life easier. And the only hard work you got to do when it comes to this. So what I personally do now, granted, my units are like filled with 10 to 12 or 13 or 15 objectives. There's 15. I think there's 15 room for 15 objectives for each unit. In the first geometry one, I have, I think, 10 or 12, right? So that big denominator, Melissa says 13 out of 13. My big denominator is like, I think 56 or something like that. So I use Power School like many of you do, right? So what I do is I take that 56, I'll double it to maybe like 112, and I'll take that numerator and double it, right? And so now it's like, so I basically make sure that in Power School, the biggest events, because Power School is only an event thing unless you use standards-based, which our school doesn't. But because I use because Power School is structured as events based, you know what I mean? I make sure that the biggest chunks of that quarter grade are the outcome grades that I get here from my rubric, if that makes sense. I'm required to give little mini district quizzes, like 14 points. They're like 10-minute quizzes, check-ins. I got to record data for the district. I'll put those mini events in there. So I'll do some mini events, but the biggest part of the grade for coursework is outcomes. If I have a denominator of 30, I'll triple it to 90. You know what? No one says you can't do that. You know, I've had teachers tell me, well, I have administrators that tell me they got to give a grade once a week, at least once a week. Well, then maybe you can grade them on active engagement during class. A 4 out of 6 is like a check minus, a 5 out of 6 is like a check, a 6 out of 6 is like a check plus. And the 3 out of 6 is they don't get off their phone and engage. Again, you could be creative in how you do this, right? But again,
Tim,
yeah.
I noticed that Chelsea made a comment asking about the 10 units. So yeah, if you scroll down, there's enough for 1, 2, 3, 4, and it goes down to 10. So there's space for 10 units. And we thought that was broad enough that it covered most, but we understand that each school has their own little oddities. And so if you notice you need small tweaks like that, you can reach out to Tim. And Tim and I are pretty good about accommodating any of the requests as long as they hold true to outcomes-based learning. And obviously having 12 units over 10 still sticks with that. And so, yeah, just reach out to us and we'll individualize it for you.
Yeah. For this year, I would say no. I would just say you might have to copy. You just have to, for the 2x for the 3 or 4, we use Sabbath too, but for the 3 or 4x for the couple extra units, I might just say clone the sheet again and have 2 of them. But maybe this summer we'll have time to, to make it like maybe 15 long. Because I polled a lot of teachers and a lot of them said like 10 is enough. But again, there's always exceptions. We totally get that. Somebody asked if they can add columns to the right. I would not recommend doing that, because that's going to screw up the Google Sheet auto calculating. Now, we forgot to mention one thing, and then we'll kind of like be done with our part. And before we give you the link, but you see how it says after unit right there under basic and intermediate, you have an after unit. This was based on Peter's recommendation, by the way, very valuable advice. But the after unit columns are simply this. Let's suppose a student just struggled to solve multi-step equations for whatever reason, but then 2 units down, they are blossoming. They're they're off the charts. Well, Peter would say, you know what? Just because they didn't earn the credit back then in that unit up there, why can't they earn it right now? Again, if we're placing emphasis on the outcomes and no longer the events, events have to do with points in time. Time is kind of irrelevant here. So if the student demonstrates mastery later after the unit, that's why the label is after unit. Then, for example, those 2 consecutive checks right there, there's 2 extra spots for you to show that, hey, and notice the options. Show it again, Melissa. Show it again. Yep. See how the X's aren't there? That's only if a student demonstrates mastery after a unit. Because those are the 3 check types. We have to put a check sub S in there. I just totally forgot, but that's coming. But But we could do that easily. But see what I'm saying? But there is no link between 5 and X1, just FYI. The link between column 5 and X1 is broken because those are technically two disjoint points in time, which is not consecutive.
So right now they still just have one, but as soon as I get the 2 consecutive over here,
after the
now
unit,
it pops up to the 3.
Yeah. And if for my classes, if that means I got to put in a change of grade form once or twice, I'll do it. Our goal is to, again, the point is sheets to make your life easy, but the thing is, this is not going to be effective for you if transitioning from events-based grading to outcomes-based grading is not going to be effective unless there's a change of mind and heart and really overall philosophy. Okay. Don't just do it for the sake of, I'm going to try something different. If you're not truly like into it, maybe you could try. I would, maybe if you're like, it's like, try it for a unit and see how it goes. Now I jumped in the pool. I jumped in the deep end and like, I'm loving it. I know other teachers who've done the same, but you know what, to try it again, the Google Sheet is to make your grading life easier. It automates it, that's all. But you're welcome to use it. You're welcome to throw us suggestions as well. We would appreciate the feedback in the comments. We might make a Google form. Actually, I think that might be easier so we can just get it all in one place instead of reading 8,000 emails. But yeah, so can we share the link there? I know it's about 10 o'clock. There it is. tinyurl.com/BTC rubric. I'll actually throw that in the chat there right now. The direct link right there. /BTC rubric. If we go over 5 minutes, that's okay. So I'll actually give the direct link right here in the chat with big caps link here. It's a Google Drive folder with 3 items in it. Right. I'm just going to screen share really quick, and then we'll take a question or two and be done. All right. Did it go through? Yes, it did. All right, good. So right here, where was it? tinyurl.com. There it is. When you go in here, you'll see 3 things. You'll see paper copies. Some teachers want paper copies of it, and that's fine. If you just go here, look, there's you can write something there. There's one with 2 units. Some teachers ask me for this because they want to record on paper and then put it in the Google Sheet later. So if that's you, you could totally do that. Okay, that option's there. But in this folder right here, this public folder, you'll also have a little how-to right here. This Google Slides things. And at the very end, there are examples. The last slide in here are examples of questions at basic, intermediate, and advanced levels for a lot of different concepts students study throughout the course, like Pythagorean theorem, determining slope of a line. You want to see some different question types for ideas? Feel free to check out those links in the Google Slides presentation, very last slide. But the actual rubric itself is the middle one right here. That you can go to it and just go to File, make a copy. Wow, there's lots of people there now. So right up here, just go to File, make a copy, and you'll be good to go. Okay? And that is that. So what else are we missing?
Well, I think, Tim, we have hit our 10 o'clock, but I'm definitely more than willing to stay on and try and field a few questions with you if you are. But we completely understand if there are others that have obligations at this point in time.
Yep.
So, and this is recorded and will be shared. It actually comes through the same link, right, Tim?
Yep. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, the link will always be there. So absolutely.
Great.
You're very, very welcome. Thanks for joining. And honestly, we were talking with Abigail. Let's bring Abigail back on board here. I'm going to add you to the stage. There we go. She took herself off. We both undid each other.
Yeah, we probably hit it at the same time.
Yep. But Abigail, I think we were talking before the thing started. I think it'd be cool if we could put out a Google form maybe, and actually take some questions in the Google form. And then maybe we could do another 1-hour broadcast with the most popular questions that we can be most effective with everybody's time. I think that would be ideal.
Sure. Do you want to answer any now? Or do you just
we could take some general ones, but yeah, let's take 5 minutes for questions. I don't want to go too far over because, go ahead. Any questions there?
I think a couple that came up just most recently were about like, how do you actually use the sheet like on the day to day? Like, do you take it with you like as you're walking around the room?
Mhm.
And then do you have it open while you're recording quizzes, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, I could totally answer that because I do teach 2 middle school classes in the morning, and I teach 2 50-minute middle school classes in the morning, and then I teach 90-minute high school classes in the afternoon. Different on certain days, but I'm always carrying my computer around on me or my iPad or whatever. But like, so I'm walking around, what, you know what? And quickly a student will ask me for help. And I'm like, what do you notice about those 2 angles there? Okay. What do we learn about? Go back to this resource. What do we learn? I see. And so immediately as I'm going to the next kid, I'll put an H for help in that slot. I immediately find it. I don't rest until I do it. You know, when you first start doing it, it's exhausting for the first week. I'll be honest, it was exhausting for me, but then it just became it's almost like, you know, that teacher exhaustion you get like in the first 2 weeks of September or August or whatever, you just get, but then your body gets in gear and you click in. It's the same logic here. Psychologically, that is, and physically.
The teachers that I've worked with, it's definitely a comfort level. Some are just innately more comfortable walking around with clipboard, and some are much more comfortable walking around with their computer. But thanks to the share of Tim in the folder, like both ways are very doable. I would guess that most people that start out with paper, once they get more comfortable and their comfort level goes up, they're probably going to pretty quickly save their own time by switching over to digital. But either are available.
Yep. And to answer someone's question before, when should I start using this, next semester or now? Again, it's a comfort level. If you're in the middle of the unit now, go ahead and finish up the unit. Do your events for the end of the unit. Maybe start thinking ahead to next unit, whatever. Even if it's before the semester is over in January, right? Try it out for the month of December and see how it goes. You know, I always like in my calculus class, I teach geometry and calculus, non-AP, but in my calculus class, I did it for quarter 2 when I started another unit right there. It's like, that's when I started doing it officially, you know. In geometry, I started earlier, but it's all based on your preference.
So Gloria came up with a really good question. She asked about what if students come in later in the year? And I know we kind of touched on that and then didn't come back to it. But when you're in your class list, you're going to put all your students in there. And then if you remember, Tim and I put extra student 1, extra student 2, extra student 3. I would recommend adding at least 5 to 10 extra students, because once again, it's not going to hurt. It's just going to be another tab at the end. As you get new students in, if you just renames the whole page to that student. So it's very easy to do that at the very beginning. You don't want to do it after you've started getting grades, because if you rerun that, it creates student copies. It will override the sheets that are there. So when you're first setting it up at the beginning of the year, go ahead and just put 5 to 10 extra students in there so that you're covered. And as you get another student, is simple as renaming that tab.
Right. In fact, in New Haven, Connecticut, we get lots of new students all throughout the year. So I make like 5 or 6 extra students that I have all at the right at the end of that Google sheet. And sure enough, a kid comes in. Well, they may have the first 5 units, there's empty, but then I start at unit 6. Okay. They came in January, February, whatever, you know, because otherwise you have to create student copies. You'll make a bunch, you'll have to delete again, but keep those extras there. It'll make your life a lot easier.
So just to give one more question, since we're trying to keep it short, most of the other questions that came up, there's kind of a couple things, but mostly they all revolved around like creating the learning targets or whatever you're calling them on the side of the objectives. So most of the questions were about that, like how do you break down the skills? Is it like standards-based grading? That kind of things.
Go ahead, Melissa. If you want to, I'm just going to find something and look at his first screenshot that I could share. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think that really goes back to your school setup and your work within your school on learning targets, or how you have your objectives set up per your units. But a piece of that is sometimes I've suggested to people that the units could be a unit and you go through your 10 units. Other times, depending on how you've set it up, it could be like if your standards are very heavy, depending on which state you're in and which standard you're talking about, that can happen a lot to where one standard might have 10 learning targets. Well, change your unit to the standard and then outline everything the student needs to be able to do in order to meet that standard. So those become your learning targets, and then you can follow through standard by standard. So unit is a very loose term, and you decide within your curriculum mapping in your building, like what you want that to relate to. So there's some flexibility there, but yeah, it really depends on the work you've done within curriculum mapping in your building.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll just show you one thing really quickly here. Totally not complete at the moment, but let me just share this here and go here. Can you see that? I just took a screenshot of a student in one of my geometry classes, a high school student who, struggles quite a bit. But look at just for an example here, look at, again, am I a perfect objective writer? No way. But this is what I tried to come up with here for at least, again, I was doing this in a rush trying to think, but I wanted to identify angle pairs. Obviously, that's a basic question. There's no way on earth that's intermediate or advanced, right? So obviously that's easy. But then, okay, now I want to algebraically determine the measures of angles formed by the transversal cutting parallel lines. And I'm thinking, well, the basic category is just they get one angle, find all the other 7, right? That's pretty easy. Intermediate ones, they have x's and x, like 2x plus 3, whatever. And then I have some more advanced ones where they got to create their own in an open middle style. Again, go to openmiddle.com. It's an amazing site you can get a lot of advanced level questions there. Open middle. Triangle angle sum theorem, different ways to talk about it. Today my students learned the triangle exterior angle theorem, right? And what I did here, this class didn't do it yet. They're doing it next time. But what I did here with one class is like basic. I just gave them, I don't use IXL a lot. But for a little bit of IXL that I do, I'm walking around the room. They're answering. It's like 26, 35. What's the sum? Exterior, right? They're just answering them. But then when they get to the algebra ones, I told them, hey, work it out on paper. And then when you're about to type your answer in, call me over and let me know. I just want to see IXL stay correct. And it did. So then I marked it as a check. Oh, I observed it. I see the work is there. Okay. Again, am I perfect at doing this? No. Am I getting better? I think so. I hope so. But I'm going to learn and grow from this just like the rest of you, and we'll see how it goes.
I want to field one last question from, sorry for my old eyes. I think it's Irma Gonzalez. And she's talking about like, what's the difference between how you would use this rubric with 4th and 5th grade or elementary in general. And I'm going to say it goes back to your objectives. Once you know your objectives and you can fill those objectives in, then the rubric works the same. And you're really just looking for that mastery. And so it goes pretty smooth. So jump in, try it, put your objectives in there. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with the outcome.
Cool. Well, thank you, everybody, for being an awesome, fun, engaging, and very interactive audience. It's been a pleasure. We'd be delighted to do this again, but we'll send out a Google form maybe in the Facebook group for sure, and I can put one on my Facebook page as well, and on Twitter, and we'll see what we can do. So to help answer your questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Abigail, for running the show behind the scenes. And I'm sorry for tripping over your feet there a few times.
No, you're good. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it.
Oh, our pleasure. So have a good night. Have a good morning. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.